The planet Verath had been dying for 11 days. Not slowly, not the kind of dying that lets you make peace with it, the kind where everything happens at once. The sky turns the wrong color, the ground shakes for no reason, and the people who are supposed to come and help do not come. They had sent the signal on the first day, standard emergency broadcast, wide frequency, every direction. Nothing came back. On the third day, Elder Verath climbed to the roof of the communication tower and looked at the sky. It was orange where it should have been blue. There were fires on the eastern ridge. The Krath Dominion ships, long, black, angular things that moved like knives through water, were circling overhead in slow, patient loops. Waiting. That was the thing about the Krath. They were patient. They had learned, across 400 years of conquest, that patience was cheaper than ammunition. You circle. You cut the supply lines. You jam the signals. You wait until the people below are hungry enough, scared enough, broken enough. Then you land. Then there is no fight left. Only surrender. Verath was 300 years old. He had seen the Krath take 6 worlds. He had watched the reports come in. First the jamming, then the blockade, then the silence where a civilization used to be. He had filed the reports. He had attended the council meetings. He had voted, twice, to send aid. Both times the aid had not been enough. Now he was on the roof, and the ships were circling, and the signal was going out into nothing, and he understood, in the particular way that old people understand things they already knew, that no one was coming. The Galactic Compact had 53 member species. 41 of them had treaties with the Krath Dominion, economic agreements, non-interference pacts, quiet arrangements that meant everyone pretended not to see things they absolutely saw. 6 of the remaining 12 were too small, or too far, or too frightened to act. 4 were currently dealing with crises of their own. 1 had been at war with the Verath for 3 centuries over a territorial dispute that everyone agreed was stupid, but no one knew how to end. That left 1. That left the humans. Verath had met 2 humans in his life. Both had been traitors. One had been loud and smelled of something sweet and fermented. The other had been quiet, with eyes that moved around the room in a way that made Verath feel like he was being measured for something, and he did not know what. Both had been perfectly polite. Neither had done anything remarkable. The humans had been in the Compact for 40 years. They were considered, when they were considered at all, which was not often, a minor species. Young, underdeveloped in several important biological ways. Their homeworld was in an unremarkable system on the outer arm. Their fleet, according to Compact records, was modest. Their technology was roughly equivalent to species who had been spacefaring for 2 centuries, not 4 decades. They had no treaties with the Krath. They had never been conquered by anyone. Those 2 facts, standing next to each other, meant either one of 2 things. Either no one had ever found them worth conquering, or something had happened, every time someone tried, that resulted in the Krath specifically leaving them alone. Verath did not know which it was. He climbed back down from the tower. There were 12,000 people in this settlement. There were 3 more settlements on the southern continent, totaling perhaps 40,000 more. The Krath would not kill them. That was not their method. They would take the planet, take the resources, take the people who had skills they wanted, relocate everyone else to labor worlds where life was technically possible and nothing else. He went back to the communications room and he did something that, 3 days ago, he would have called desperate. He sent the signal again, but this time he routed it specifically. He filtered out the compact general band. He found the human frequency, the specific, narrow band that human ships monitored, that had been filed with the compact directory and mostly ignored, because who was going to call the humans specifically? He sent the signal to them. Then he sat down and he did not expect anything. The human ship absolute threshold was 6 light hours from Verath when the signal hit. It was a cargo run, 3rd-tier freight, the kind of work that kept a ship running, but nobody wrote songs about. Commander Yael Okafor was in the middle of eating something that claimed to be noodles, and was not fully succeeding at that claim, when her comms officer, Ensign Daejung Kwan, looked up with the particular expression that meant something had arrived that did not fit into any existing category. "Commander," Kwan said. "Talk to me. Emergency signal, Verath system, they specifically routed to our frequency." Okafor set down her knot noodles. "Verath is under Krath blockade." "Yes." "And they called us." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, The mess hall had 2 other people in it. Neither of them was saying anything, but neither of them was eating anymore either. "How bad?" she said. Quan pulled the signal apart on his screen. He was quiet for longer than she liked. 11 days in. They've been trying to get anyone on the general ban since day 1. The Krath jamming is almost total. This signal got through a gap. Small one. Maybe not deliberate. Or they let it through, Okafor said. "Let everyone know they're doing it. Send a message." "Yeah." She stood up and walked to the viewport. Stars. The ordinary, silent arrangement of them. She had grown up in Lagos, and the sky there had been so full of light that stars were something you had to earn. Drive 3 hours out of the city and still you got only the bright ones. She had loved them unreasonably. "Get me Captain Chen," she said. "Commander, we're a cargo ship." "I know what we are, Quan. Get me Chen." Captain Marcus Chen was on Uns Harbinger, a patrol vessel doing routine boundary work 2 systems over, when the relayed signal reached him. He read it twice. He was 44 years old, born in Chengdu, had been in the UN Space Navy for 22 years, had seen 9 engagements, had never once been part of anything that made the history books. He was what the Navy called a steady hand, not flashy, not decorated, just good, in the particular, unglamorous way that kept people alive. He looked at the signal for a long time. Then he looked at the ship status display. Then he opened a channel to his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Priya Nair, who was running diagnostics in the engine room. "Nair," he said. "Sir, stop what you're doing and come to the bridge." She came up in 40 seconds, which told him she had already heard. Ships were small. Things moved fast. "You saw it," he said. "I saw it." Thoughts. She leaned against the console with her arms crossed. Nair was younger than him by 12 years, and smarter than him in ways he had never felt insecure about, because she was also loyal in ways that were increasingly rare. "It's a trap," she said. "Could be. Or it's real. Also could be. If it's real," she said. "We're a patrol vessel." "I know. One ship against a Krath blockade is not." "I know, Nair." She looked at him. He was already at the communications station typing in a code she recognized. Command uplink. He was calling Fleet. Not to ask permission. He was past asking permission. He was calling to tell them what he was going to do, and give them enough time to stop him if they were going to. He sent the message. Then he looked at the timestamp. At current communication lag, Fleet would receive his message in 4 hours and 16 minutes. A response would arrive back in roughly the same. That meant the earliest anyone could tell him no was in 8 hours and 32 minutes. He set the intercept course for Verath. "We'll be there in 6 hours, he said. Nair did the math. That's before Fleet can respond. "Yes, sir. They called us, Nair." He said it simply, not dramatically, the way you state a fact that changes everything. "They specifically called us. Every other signal they sent went into the void. They called us by name." She was quiet. "We don't leave people when they call us," he said. "That's it. That's all of it." She uncrossed her arms. "I'll prep the crew." What neither Chen nor Nair knew, what very few people outside certain classified Navy archives knew, was that Chen's message to Fleet had not gone only to Fleet. There was a protocol, old one, drawn up after humanity's second contact with the Krath, after the incident in the Gliza corridor that no one talked about publicly and everyone in the Navy knew about. The protocol had a name that was a number, Directive 7. Directive 7 said, if a human ship signals distress or engagement in Krath-controlled or Krath-adjacent space, the signal is automatically routed to 3 other locations simultaneously. Fleet Command was one. The other 2 were classified. Chen's message was not a distress signal. It was a notification of intent, but it contained coordinates in Krath-blockaded space, and that was enough to trigger the automatic routing. In 2 classified locations, screens lit up. People looked at those screens. Those people made calls. Morath was asleep, or trying to be, the way old people sleep when they know they shouldn't, when his communications officer, a young woman named Selah who had never seen war before this month, knocked on his door. He was awake before she knocked twice. "What?" he said. "Signal, Elder." Her voice had something in it he had not heard from anyone in 11 days, something fragile and specific, a response. He got up. He was dressed in 3 movements. He was down the hall in 10 seconds. The signal was short. Human transmission. The format unmistakable. Clipped, direct, almost rude by Verath standards. This is UN's Harbinger. Signal received. En route. ETA 6 hours. Maintain shelter protocols. Do not respond to Krath communication. We're coming. 3 sentences, less than 20 words. Sayla was watching him read it. She had the expression of someone who wants to feel hope but is afraid of what it costs if you're wrong. It's one ship, Morath said, because she needed honesty, not comfort. One human patrol vessel. Is that? She stopped. I don't know, he said, and he meant it. I genuinely do not know. He looked at the signal again. We're coming. Not we will try. Not we have notified authorities. Not please be advised that your signal has been received and forwarded to the appropriate channels. We're coming. There was something in the bluntness of it, something that sat in his chest in a way he did not have a word for. The Krath ships were still circling. The fires on the eastern ridge were still burning. His people were still underground, still frightened, still counting their food. One human ship was 6 hours away. Morath was 300 years old, and he had filed reports on 6 conquered worlds, and he had learned to hold hope at a distance, the way you learn not to touch a hot surface. He held it at a distance now, but he did not put it down. 6 hours is a long time when you are underground and the sky belongs to someone else. Morath spent most of it in the communications room, monitoring the Krath channel, watching the pattern of the blockade, the spacing of the ships, the intervals of their sweeps. He had no military training, but he had 300 years of pattern recognition. The Krath were not worried. That was the thing. Their movements were routine, unhurried. The circling had the rhythm of maintenance, not combat. They knew no one was coming. They had done this enough times to know what coming looked like and what silence looked like, and they knew this was silence. 3 hours in, one of the Krath ships moved to a lower orbit. Beginning the final assessment phase, Morath thought, they would want to have ground teams ready within 24 hours. The waiting was almost over. He thought about the one human ship. He had pulled everything the compact database had on the UN's Harbinger. A patrol vessel. Armed. All human ships were armed, which was itself considered mildly unusual in compact circles. A subject of quiet commentary, but not heavily. Standard configuration for a ship its size. The crew manifest listed 41 people. 41 people against a Krath blockade of 9 warships. He did the math. He did it several times, hoping the answer would change. It did not. At 5 hours and 40 minutes, Sayla came to him. Elder, she said. Another signal. He looked at the screen. This one was not from Harbinger. The frequency signature was human, unmistakably, but the origin code was different. Multiple origin codes, overlapping, which meant, Elder, Sayla said quietly. I think it's more than one ship. Morath looked at the screen for a long time. The signal was not addressed to them. It was a fleet communication, human to human, and they were only catching the edge of it. But the content was not encrypted, because, Morath realized slowly, they were not bothering to encrypt it. Either they did not think anyone was listening, or they did not care. The message was simple, coordinate set, a designation code he did not recognize, and a phrase that, when he ran it through the translation matrix, came out as, all ahead. No flags, Thunder Protocol. He had no idea what Thunder Protocol meant. He looked at the coordinate set. They were the coordinates for Verath. How many ships does that frequency signature indicate? He said. Sayla was already working on it. She worked for 40 seconds. Then she looked up and her expression was the same one she'd had 3 hours ago. That fragile, terrified, desperate thing. I can't get an exact count, she said. The signal overlap is... She stopped. Recalculated. Elder, I think it might be a lot. The fires on the eastern ridge were still burning. The Krath ships were still circling. 1 hour away. Whatever was coming was 1 hour away. Morath sat back in his chair, and he did something he had not done in a very long time. He waited with his hands open. The Krath admiral's name was Verath, and he had taken 12 worlds. He did not count them for pride. He counted them the way an accountant counts, because the number mattered for planning, for resource projection, for knowing how many more of these operations he had left before he could retire to the Krath homeworld and live out his remaining years somewhere that smelled better than the inside of a warship. 12 worlds, 43 years of service, a record that was, in Krath military circles, considered excellent without being extraordinary. He was not a hero. He was not a legend. He was exactly what the Dominion needed more than heroes and legends. He was reliable. The Verath operation was scheduled to complete in 18 hours. His 9 ships were in optimal blockade formation. The jamming was holding. The population below was contained, non-combative. They had not even attempted to arm themselves, which he respected in the abstract way you respect a species that knows when it is finished. The resource survey was done. The labor allocation lists were drafted. Relocation ships were 3 days out. Everything was on schedule. He was in his command chair reviewing the relocation manifests when his sensor officer made a sound. It was a small sound, a careful sound, the kind of sound a person makes when they see something they do not want to be the one to report. Sector, Verath said. Admiral. Sensor Officer Verath did not look up from her screen. She had the body language of someone walking across ice they were not sure about. I'm reading something. At the edge of sensor range. Compact response? No. The signal profile is, it's not compact standard. He felt his first small prickling of attention. Clarify. Human, she said. One word, flat. Verath set down the manifest. One ship? Working on it, Admiral. A pause. Her hands moved across the controls. The ice-walking posture worsened. Multiple ships. The bridge was quiet. The particular quality of quiet that happens on a military bridge when everyone has information they are still organizing into something they are willing to say out loud. How multiple, Verath said. Verath looked up then. He could not read her expression perfectly. Sensor officers trained themselves out of having readable expressions because readable expressions became liabilities. But something was there. Something at the edge of her eyes. I need another 40 seconds, Admiral. The sensor profile is, I haven't seen this configuration before. He waited. He was good at waiting. 40 seconds. 50. 60. Admiral. Her voice was different now. Not ice-walking. Something else. I'm reading 12 vessels. Destroyers minimum. Several larger class. And, she stopped. And, there is one vessel I cannot classify. The mass reading is, she actually turned and looked at him, which she had not done in 3 years of service. Sir, if the reading is accurate, that vessel is approximately 9 kilometers in length. The bridge was quiet for a different reason now. Verath's experience, 43 years of it, reached up and grabbed him by the back of the neck. Not fear. He did not allow himself fear, but a very specific, cold kind of attention. The kind that meant, the thing happening right now is not the kind of thing that has happened before. Run it again, he said. I have run it 4 times, Admiral. 9 kilometers. The largest Verath vessel in active service was 3 kilometers long, and there were only 2 of them, and they were not here. Communication from the lead vessel, his comms officer said. Audio. The voice that came through was human. He had heard humans speak before. The compact occasionally involved them in joint sessions, though not often. Their voices had a range and a quality that was difficult to describe except to say that it landed in the room differently than other species. Something about the frequency. This voice was female, calm, not aggressive, which was almost worse. Verath Blockade Command, this is Captain Yael Okafor, of Uns Harbinger. You are in contested space under emergency humanitarian provision of the Galactic Compact, Article 7, Subsection 3. I am formally notifying you that human naval forces are present and that the blockade of Verath is in violation of said provision. You have 90 minutes to begin withdrawal. This notification is a courtesy. It will not be repeated. A pause. Then, very quiet. Almost too quiet to be intentional. We're not in a hurry. The channel closed. Verath sat in his command chair. He looked at his sensor display. 14 human ships at the edge of range. One of them the size of a small moon. He thought about 12 worlds, 43 years, the retirement he had planned. He opened a channel to his second-in-command. Reach out to Dominion Command. Emergency uplink. I need current human engagement records. All of them. Now. Admiral, our database shows only 3 recorded engagements with human forces. I know what our database shows. I want to know if there's anything that isn't in our database. A silence. Sir? Just do it. In the underground shelters beneath Verath's capital, Verath heard the human broadcast on a frequency his communications team had jury-rigged to monitor. He heard it once. Then, he sat quietly for a long moment. Sayla was next to him. She had been awake for 36 hours. She had the look of someone who was running on something beyond exhaustion, something thinner and more dangerous. 90 minutes, she said. Yes. And if the Krath don't withdraw? Morath thought about the sensor data he had been watching for the past 2 hours. 14 ships, one that did not fit any category in his experience. Then we find out something, he said. What? What humans do when they say they're coming. Krath Commander Vessel 3, designation Tactical 9, broke formation at the 40-minute mark. Not to withdraw, to probe. This was procedure. Vorak had authorized a single-ship sensor approach, get within clean range, get accurate readings, and report back before any decision was made. It was reasonable. It was professional. It was the kind of thing you did when you needed more information before committing. Tactical 9 moved forward. Clean, slow approach, non-aggressive posture. The human ships did not respond. It moved closer. The sensor officer aboard was a veteran. He took careful readings. He cataloged what he saw with a professional's thoroughness, and then transmitted the report back to Admiral Vorak, and then, afterward, sat in his station for a long moment without moving. The report reached Vorak 4 minutes later. He read it in two. The large vessel, the 9-kilometer vessel, had a designation visible on its hull. The Krath reading system translated the human character set with an 87% accuracy rate. The name came back as Consequence. He read the weapons array inventory from the report. Then he read it again. Then he pulled up the records his second-in-command had retrieved from Dominion Command. The engagement records, all of them, including the 3 classified files that officially did not exist. He had clearance. He had always had clearance but had never needed it. He read those too. He sat in his command chair for 6 minutes. Then he opened the fleet channel. All vessels, he said. This is Admiral Vorak. We are initiating withdrawal from Verath system. Orderly formation. Begin immediately. The bridge went still. Admiral, his second began. Begin immediately, Vorak said. Not loudly. Just again. The orders went out. Aboard Consequence, Commander of the Fleet Admiral Sarah Osei watched the Krath formation begin to move on her sensor display. She had her hands clasped behind her back. She was standing at the viewport. Around her, the bridge of the largest warship in the human fleet operated with a quiet and complete professionalism that she had spent 11 years building. Her executive officer, Captain James Adeyemi, came to stand beside her. They're pulling out, he said. Yes? No shots fired. No. He was quiet for a moment. He had been with her for 7 years, long enough to know when to talk and when not to. This was close to a when not to. But he said, 90 minutes. They lasted 40. She did not quite smile. They looked us up. He did look at her then. The classified files. Something. She watched the Krath ships reconfigure into a withdrawal formation. Graceful, she thought. Even retreating, they moved gracefully. Someone over there did their research and made a decision. Good decision? She looked at the sensor display. 9 Krath warships choosing to be somewhere else. 40,000 people on the planet below who did not know yet that the sky was about to stop being occupied. For them? Yes, she said. Best decision they could have made today. The first confirmation reached Morath's communications room at 53 minutes into the 90-minute window. One of his technicians, a young man named Pesh, who had learned to monitor Krath sensor frequencies in the past 11 days because necessity teaches fast, looked up from his screen with an expression Morath had not seen on a young face in almost 2 weeks. Elder, Pesh said, the blockade ships, they're changing course. Morath stood up, walked to the screen. The Krath formation, the same 9-ship pattern he had watched for 11 days, the same slow, patient circles, was breaking apart, not attacking, not repositioning, spreading outward, moving toward the jump corridor. Leaving. They were leaving. Selah made a sound next to him, small, compressed, the sound of a person not crying. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then Pesh said, voice cracking just slightly on the edges, they're going. They're actually going. Morath watched the screen. The Krath ships were moving with a purpose and a speed they had not shown once during the entire 11-day blockade. Unhurried was over. They were done here. They had looked at something and decided to be done here. He thought about the human broadcasts, the cold, calm courtesy of the notification. The voice that said, "We're not in a hurry," in a tone that somehow made the not hurrying more frightening than urgency. The 9-kilometer ship sitting at the edge of sensor range like a fact about the universe that you did not know until you did. He had spent 300 years working in diplomacy and politics and intergalactic relations. He had learned many things about power. The most important one was this. The most effective kind of power was the kind that did not need to be demonstrated, because the other side already knew. The Krath had looked at the humans. They had remembered something. They had left. "Open a channel," Morath said. "Human frequency. I want to speak to whoever is in command." The voice that answered was tired, not beaten tired, just the ordinary tired of someone who had been awake for a long time doing things that required complete attention. It was the same female voice from the first broadcast. Captain Okafor of the Harbinger, the first ship, Morath realized, the one that had come alone. "Captain," Morath said, "I am Elder Morath of the Verath Settlement Council. I want—" He stopped. 300 years of diplomatic language, and none of it was exactly right for this. "I want to say thank you. I know that is not a complex enough thing to say, but I want to say it first." A small pause. "You don't need to thank me," Okafor said. "We got your signal. You came based on one signal, from a species you had little relationship with, against a blockade you did not cause." "Yes. Why?" It was a real question, not rhetorical. He genuinely wanted to know. Another pause. Longer this time. Not because she was struggling to answer, he thought, but because she was deciding how much of the answer to give. "Elder," she finally said, "you called us." That was all. He sat with that for a moment. "I should connect you with Fleet Command for the formal arrangements," she continued. "They'll want to establish a supply line, medical support, survey the surface damage. Standard post-blockade protocol." "Yes," he said. "Yes, of course." He started to close the channel, then stopped. "Captain, sir, the large ship, the one at the edge of our sensor range, it is 9 kilometers long. A beat, give or take. What is it called?" "Consequence." He turned the word over in his head, ran it through 3 interpretive frameworks to make sure he had the connotation right, not just the translation. He had the connotation right. "That," he said slowly, "is a very deliberate name." "We thought so," Okafor said. He closed the channel. Outside, the last Krath ship was crossing the jump threshold. In a few minutes, the orange-wrong sky would have nothing in it that did not belong there. Sayla was crying with her hands over her mouth, as quietly as she could. Pesh was staring at the sensor display like it was something sacred. Morath sat in his chair with his hands in his lap, and he thought about a species 40 years in space that had been treated, consistently, as a minor footnote. A young species, an unremarkable species in an unremarkable system with a modest fleet and no treaties with the Krath. He thought about what he now knew, what he suspected, more precisely, because there were still things he did not know, and the not knowing sat in him with the specific weight of something important. He thought about a ship called Consequence that sat 9 kilometers long at the edge of sensor range. He thought about 9 Krath warships, veterans of 12 conquests, choosing to leave without a single shot being fired. He thought about a voice saying, "You called us," as if that were the simplest explanation in the world. "We're coming." They had come. Morath was 300 years old. He had stopped being surprised by the universe in his first century. He had made peace with that loss of surprise in his second. He had learned to appreciate competence and predictability in his third. He was surprised now. He sat very still, and he let himself be surprised, and he thought, "I do not fully understand what just happened, and I think that might be the most important thing." The Galactic Compact held an emergency session 7 days after the Krath withdrew from Verath. This was fast, by Compact standards. Usually emergency sessions took 3 weeks to schedule, because 53 species across 40 systems had schedules that did not coordinate easily, and there were always 3 or 4 delegates who needed special travel arrangements, and someone always had an objection to the meeting format. The speed was itself a message. Everyone knew what the session was about. Everyone had been watching what happened at Verath, quietly, through third-party channels, in the way that Compact members watch things they did not want to be seen watching. What had happened was this: the Krath Dominion, which had not backed down from a blockade in 400 years of operations, had backed down from Verath in 40 minutes. 40 minutes after the human fleet arrived, without a shot fired. In Compact diplomatic circles, this was what people called a significant data point. They used that language because it was safer than the other language, which was, "We may have been very wrong about the humans for a very long time, and we need to figure out how wrong and what to do about it." Ambassador Leth of the Charathi was the session chair. She had held this position for 9 years, and she was good at it in the specific way that good session chairs are good. She controlled the room without appearing to. She saw where conversations were going before the speakers did, and she had the ability to say nothing in a way that communicated a great deal. She watched the 52 other delegations file into the chamber, and she watched the human delegation come in last. The human ambassador was a man named Dr. Ilan Voss. She had dealt with him for 3 years. He was pleasant, slightly formal. He asked intelligent questions in sessions and did not speak unless he had something worth saying, which she had always appreciated. He sat down. He had 2 advisors with him. He did not appear nervous. He did not appear triumphant either, which was the option she had been worried about. He appeared exactly as he always appeared, which was, Leth thought, turning this over carefully, the most interesting thing about him. She opened the session. "We are convened to discuss the events of the Verath system. 11 days passed. The floor is open for comment." She paused. Ambassador Kreen of the Sorath Collective was on his feet before she finished saying his name. The Sorath were a large species, tall, broad, vibrantly colored, and Kreen used all of it when he was agitated. He was using all of it now. What the human fleet did was an unauthorized act of aggression in Krath-adjacent space. The Krath blockade was itself a violation of Article 7, someone else said. "We do not recognize the human interpretation of Article 7. The Krath don't recognize Article 7 at all, so how is the Krath position relevant?" Leth let it run for 3 minutes. She had learned that letting it run early saved time later. People said the heated thing first and then, having said it, were sometimes able to think. She brought the room back to order. She looked at Dr. Voss. He had not spoken. He was sitting with his hands folded on the table. He was watching the room in the way Leth had noted in their first meeting, taking the temperature of it, filing things. "Ambassador Voss," she said, "your fleet's actions at Verath." "Yes," he said. "Would you like to address the session?" "I would." He stood. He was not a physically imposing man, medium height, lean, the kind of face that was easy to underestimate. "I'll be brief, because I think the situation is fairly simple. Verath sent a distress signal on day 1 of the Krath blockade. They sent it on the compact general band. For 11 days, the signal went unanswered. On day 11, they routed a signal specifically to the human emergency frequency. Captain Chen of Un's Harbinger received it and responded. Fleet assets were deployed under humanitarian emergency provision." He stopped. He looked around the room. "That's it," he said. "That's the whole thing." A pause. "There are no implications beyond what I've stated. We received a distress call. We responded to it. We will continue to respond to distress calls directed to us. That is our position." Ambassador Kreen was on his feet again. "The deployment of a vessel the size of Consequence is not a humanitarian response. Consequence was in the region on a separate tasking," Voss said. "She was redirected under emergency protocol. Her presence served to confirm to the Krath that the deployment was serious. It was intimidation." Voss considered this with the air of someone actually thinking about whether it was accurate. "I would call it communication," he said. "We communicated that we were serious. The Krath chose to respond to that communication by withdrawing. We are glad they made that choice. It saved lives on several sides." He sat down. The room was quiet. Leth looked at the delegates around her. The Sorath were agitated. The Minoki were very still, too still, the stillness of people who were recalculating. The Gali delegation was whispering amongst themselves. 3 species with Krath economic treaties were staring at the table. She looked at Voss. He was watching the room again, filing things. After the session, Leth requested a private meeting with Voss. He agreed without hesitation. They met in one of the small conference rooms off the main chamber. She had tea. He had something from a human thermal container that smelled sweet and dark. They sat across from each other, and there was a moment where both of them seemed to be deciding something. She decided first. "Ambassador," she said, "I have been in compact diplomacy for 31 years. I want to ask you something directly. Please. The Krath do not withdraw. In 400 years of operations, they have never abandoned a blockade mid-operation. They have escalated. They have negotiated from strength. They have occasionally accepted face-saving diplomatic frameworks that functionally amount to withdrawal, while not technically being called that. She paused. They did not do any of those things at Verath. They simply left. 40 minutes after your fleet arrived. No negotiation. No communication. They looked at your fleet and left. Voss waited. He knew there was a question coming. I need to understand why, she said. Not for political reasons, not for the record. I need to understand it because I am responsible for the safety of 53 species in this compact, and what happened at Verath has changed the calculations I used to do that job. Voss looked at his thermal container for a moment. The Krath have very good intelligence services, he said finally. Yes. We have been aware of this for some time. Leth waited. Approximately 19 years ago, Voss said, there was an incident in the Glisa corridor. A Krath survey vessel entered what we consider to be human sovereign space. There was an engagement. He said the last sentence simply. No drama, like stating a weather condition. We were given to understand that the Krath survey vessel withdrew, Leth said carefully. It withdrew. He looked at her. There were 4 ships in the engagement, Ambassador. The survey vessel withdrew. The other 3 did not. Leth was quiet. This was not publicly reported, Voss continued. We did not publicize it. The Krath had reasons to not publicize it. A mutual silence was maintained, a small pause. We have had 2 additional incidents in the 14 years since. The results were consistent. We have also declined 4 separate Krath diplomatic overtures in that period. Declined. He held her gaze. We were offered economic incentives to enter non-interference pacts, similar to the ones the Krath maintain with the majority of compact members. And you refused. We found the terms unacceptable. Leth considered this. What were the terms? The standard terms, he said. We trade freely. We do not intervene in Krath operations. We look the other way. We file no reports. He let that sit for one beat. We looked the other way once, Ambassador. Long ago, before we were part of any compact, before we met anyone from out here. She waited. Something had changed in his voice, still controlled, but carrying something. We did not like who we were when we did it, he said. We decided not to do it again. He picked up his thermal container. The meeting, she understood, was effectively over. He was not being rude. He had said what there was to say. She stopped him once more. The ship, she said. Consequence. Who named it? The crew, Voss said. It was a crew vote. They do that with our larger vessels. It's a tradition. He stood. There was not much debate about that one. He left. Leth sat in the empty conference room for a while. She thought about 400 years of Krath operations and one incident in the Glisa corridor 19 years ago that nobody had talked about, and she thought about a species that had been in space for 40 years being treated as a minor footnote. She thought about what it meant that the footnote had been there, this whole time, quietly accumulating events that no one was discussing. She thought about a crew that had voted on a name and not debated very long. She flagged 3 items in her personal files for immediate follow-up: the Glisa corridor incident, the full text of the Article 7 provisions, and an internal compact analysis from 6 years ago titled Human Military Capacity, a preliminary assessment that she had read when it was published and not thought much about. She was going to read it again. Elder Verath received the recording of the compact session 2 days after it occurred. He watched it from beginning to end. He watched Voss speak. He watched the room respond. He watched Leth's face, not her words, her face, during the private meeting excerpts that had been shared with the Verath delegation as a courtesy. He paused it at the moment Voss said we decided not to do it again. He sat there with the image frozen, and he thought about a species that had looked at itself doing something and decided, collectively, not to do it anymore. He thought about how hard that was. He had 300 years of history in him, and he could count on his hands the number of times a species had made a genuine, binding, costly collective decision about its own character. Decisions that actually changed behavior. Decisions that held. He had been part of one such decision 60 years ago. It had cost the Verath their northern trade route and a generation of economic hardship, and they had made it anyway, because the alternative was becoming something they did not want to be. He understood that. He understood Voss in a way he had not understood him before watching that recording. He sent a message to the Human Compact delegation, formal, because formality was a kind of respect and he respected them, requesting extended diplomatic contact. Requesting, and he chose this word carefully, partnership. Not alliance, not arrangement, not cooperation framework. Partnership. The response came back in 6 hours. Yes, let's talk. 3 words. He smiled. Not at the brevity, which he was getting used to. At the yes, which was simple and clean and without conditions. 3 weeks after the Verath incident, in a small office on Earth's orbital station, a woman named Dr. Amara Sese was having a conversation that was, technically, not happening. Sese ran the division of the Foreign Affairs Ministry that handled what was internally called perception management, specifically, managing how humanity was perceived by the Compact. She had been doing this for 16 years. She had a very good understanding of the gap between what other species thought they knew about humanity and what was actually true. The gap was large. It had always been large. In the early years, the first decade of Compact membership, the gap had been mostly ignorance on both sides. The Compact didn't know much about humans. Humans didn't know much about the Compact. Both sides were cautious, polite, feeling things out. Then humanity had started learning, and had made some decisions about what it was going to be. Sese had been part of those decisions. Not making them, she was not at that level, but implementing them. The consequence, for instance, had been her division's suggestion originally. Not the ship, the name. The idea that certain things should be named in ways that communicated something to people who looked them up. The Compact session was useful, said the man across from her. His name was Minister Yao, and he ran the actual levers that Sese's division supported. Voss did well, she said. He always does. Yao was quiet for a moment. The Krath will adjust. Yes. They'll stop doing the things they know we'll respond to. They'll look for the edges. Yes. And the Compact members who have treaties with the Krath will be uncomfortable, Sese said, for a while. Then some of them will start asking themselves what they actually want. She leaned back. The Sorath have 3 border disputes with the Krath that have been frozen for 60 years because they don't see an alternative. If there's an alternative, there's risk. There's always risk. The question is what you do with it. She looked at the window. Earth below, blue-white, unremarkable, from out here. Easy to underestimate. Which was fine. Being underestimated had been very useful. The Verath thing was small, Yao said. 1 system, low-value resources. The Krath chose it specifically because it was isolated and no one would notice. Right. They noticed. Yes, she said. Everyone noticed. She paused. That's also fine. We have been in this compact for 40 years, being the species at the back of the room that nobody thinks much about. That ends at some point anyway. Might as well end with Verath. And what replaces it? Sese considered the question. The truth, she said. We don't have to manage perception anymore. We just have to be what we are. Which is? She looked at him. She thought about Harbinger, 1 ship, going toward a blockade because someone called. She thought about Consequence sitting at the edge of sensor range while 9 Krath warships decided what to do about it. She thought about a crew that voted on a name and didn't debate very long. The species, she said. That shows up. The Krath did not adjust the way Minister Yao had expected. They did not pull back. They did not look for edges. They did not quietly recalibrate their operations and file Verath as an expensive lesson. Instead, they went silent. For 31 days after the Verath withdrawal, the Krath Dominion conducted no operations, no blockades, no survey missions, no diplomatic communications with Compact members. Their ships stayed inside Krath territory, moving between their own systems in patterns that defense analysts described as not aggressive, not retreating, something else. Admiral Vorak, having been recalled to Krath Command after the Verath withdrawal, had been in 7 briefings and 1 extended debrief in the first 2 weeks. He had told the same story 7 times. The human fleet had arrived. He had requested current engagement records. He had reviewed them. He had ordered withdrawal. Every time the questions stopped in the same place. Why, Admiral? What was in those records? Vorak had 3 answers to that question, and he gave different ones depending on who was asking. For the Tactical Committee, he gave the asset analysis, 1 vessel of exceptional size and armament, 11 additional warships, sensor profiles consistent with weapons technology his fleet was not equipped to counter. For the Intelligence Committee, he gave the historical record, the Gliese Corridor, The two subsequent engagements, the pattern of human behavior in all three, consistent, decisive, complete. For the High Council, which was the third and last briefing, he gave the honest answer. He had looked at the human fleet, and he had recognized something. He had recognized it the way you recognize a predator, not by its specific shape, because he had not seen its shape before, but by the way it held space, by the quality of its stillness. The Krath had built their empire on a specific understanding of other species. The understanding was, every species, at the core, wants to survive. When presented with a sufficiently clear cost-benefit analysis, every species chooses survival. You make the cost of resistance high enough, the cost of cooperation low enough, and the calculation always goes the same way. He had applied this framework to the humans before Verath. Every intelligence assessment of humanity in the Krath system had applied it. 40 years of data, 3 engagements. The pattern was unusual, but explainable. The humans were young, aggressive in the way young species were aggressive, had probably not yet fully understood what the cost structure looked like. He had looked at the fleet at Verath, and he had understood that this was wrong. The humans were not young aggressive. They were not failing to understand the cost structure. They were operating on a different cost structure entirely. The Krath calculation, survival first, everything else in service of survival. The human calculation, something else first, survival in service of it. He did not know exactly what the something else was. He had some thoughts about it, drawn from the engagement records and from the communications they had intercepted, and from the very specific way Captain Okafor had said we're not in a hurry, not as a threat, as a simple statement of fact. He told the High Council this. There was a long silence in the room. Then the council chair, an ancient creature named Verath 7, said, "Admiral, are you telling us the humans are irrational?" "No," Verath said. "I am telling you they are rational within a different system of values than we have attributed to them." Another silence. "And that this makes them more dangerous," Verath 7 said. "Yes," Verath said. Significantly. The silence from the Krath was noticed. It was noticed by compact intelligence services, by 3 private commercial interests with deep ties to the Dominion, and by a compact analyst named Counselor Reen of the Minoki, who had been quietly tracking human-Krath interactions since the first Glisa corridor report 3 years ago, when it had finally, partially, surfaced. Reen was 47 years old, Minoki standard, which made her young for a council member. She had gotten her position through a combination of genuine analytical brilliance and a specific ability to see the shape of things before other people could see the individual pieces. She had seen the human shape 4 years ago, and it had kept her awake in a way that she would not have described as fear exactly, but was adjacent to it. She requested a private meeting with Ambassador Voss. He agreed without hesitation. She was noticing a pattern with him. He always agreed to meetings without hesitation. She was not sure yet what to make of it, whether it was confidence, or openness, or a calculation, or all 3. They met in the same conference room where he had met Leth. Leth had told her about that meeting. Leth had told her about the thermal container and the 3 Krath engagements and we decided not to do it again. Reen had questions that were different from Leth's. "Ambassador," she said, "the Krath have been quiet for 31 days. We've noticed," Voss said. "I want to understand what they're doing. That makes 2 of us." She looked at him. He was, as he always was, pleasant and slightly formal, and watching the room. "You don't know?" she said. "We have assessments. I would not call them certainties." He paused. "The Krath are strategic at a generational level. We've been in their threat assessments for approximately 19 years. What they do with a new threat assessment takes time to see. What they do," she repeated. "What they decide." "And if they decide to respond to Verath with force?" He considered this, not performing consideration. She had been watching diplomatic affect for 20 years. She could tell the difference. Actually thinking. "Counselor," he said, "can I ask you something instead?" She gestured assent. "Why did you bring me this question? You could have asked our military liaison. You could have asked Fleet. Why the ambassador?" She had an answer to this, which she had prepared. She chose not to give it and gave the honest answer instead. "Because I want to know what you think," she said. "Not what your military thinks, what you think." He nodded, as if this were the right answer, and he was pleased with it. I think, he said slowly, that the Krath are deciding whether we are a problem they can solve or a fact they have to live with, and I think the deciding is taking longer than it usually does, because they haven't been in this position before. And which do you want them to decide? The second one, he said simply. And if they choose the first? He was quiet for a moment. We've been in space for 40 years, he said. In that time we've solved a lot of problems. He looked at her steadily. We haven't been wrong about our ability to solve one yet. It was the closest thing to a threat she had heard from him in 3 years of meetings. And it was not a threat at all, technically. It was a statement of record. That was the thing, she thought, walking back to her office afterward. That was the specific thing. The humans did not threaten. They stated history. They let the record speak. They said we have never been wrong about this yet, and they said it in the same tone you use when you're discussing crop yields or cargo schedules. The Krath were deciding what to do. Reen had her own decision to make. She sat down at her desk and she pulled up the draft proposal she had been working on for 2 months. It was a proposal for a new compact security framework, specifically, a rapid response protocol for humanitarian emergencies in blockaded systems, with a joint command structure, funded contributions from member species, and a duty response mechanism. She had written it. She had stalled on finalizing it because she had not been sure what the political landscape would hold. She looked at it for a while. Then she started editing. On the surface of Verath, recovery was going faster than the projections had said it would. Partly this was human supply ships. The first had arrived on day 2 post-blockade, a cargo vessel, not a military ship, loaded with medical supplies and food and portable power generation equipment. It had been followed by 2 more in the next week. The crews of all 3 had gotten off the ships and worked alongside Verath recovery teams, and there had been a communication difficulty on day 1 because the translation matrices had gaps in both directions, and someone, a human engineer named Ose, no relation to the fleet admiral, had resolved it by drawing pictures, which worked better than it had any right to. The Verath people had been cautious with the humans at first. After 11 days underground, you are cautious with everyone, including the people who came to help. But the humans had also been cautious, slow to push, careful about space, asking questions before they did things that would affect other people. Sela had been the one to notice it first. She mentioned it to Morath. They ask before they do things, she said. Every time, even when it's obvious, even when they clearly know what needs to be done. Morath had thought about this. Why do you think that is? She thought. Because they know they're outsiders. They don't want to decide things that aren't theirs to decide. He had thought about that for a long time. He thought about the Krath, who never asked, who arrived and assessed and acted, because the asking was irrelevant. The act of arriving was already the decision. Who had taken 12 worlds by making decisions about other people's things without once wondering if they had the right. He thought about the humans, who had the largest ship he had ever heard of in a single system, and were asking whether they should put the medical tents here or over there. He thought there was something in that. Something specific and important that he did not quite have the language for. He was working on the language. Captain Yael Okafor had not gone home. Harbinger had been reassigned to support operations in Verath system, which meant she was on her 3rd week in the same star system, which was 3 weeks longer than a cargo run that had turned into something else. She did not mind. There was work. What she had not expected was the conversation she had in the 3rd week with a Verath elder named Sela. Not Morath, but his communications officer, the young woman who had been awake when the signals came, who came aboard Harbinger and asked to see the ship. Okafor gave her the tour herself. Sela was careful. She moved slowly, looked at things for a long time, asked precise questions. What does this do? How does that work? Why is this here and not there? At the weapons station, she stopped. You have more armaments than our database suggested, she said. We upgrade regularly, Okafor said. Not defensively, just factually. Sela looked at the station for a moment. Can I ask you something? Yes. When you got our signal, she said, you came alone, before the rest of the fleet, 1 ship. Yes. Why didn't you wait for the fleet? Okafor considered this. Because you needed someone there, she said. The fleet took time. You needed, she thought about how to say it, you needed to know someone was coming. Even 1 ship changes what you know. You could have been destroyed. Yes. That didn't stop you. No. Sela looked at her. Why not? Okafor looked at the weapons station, and then at the viewport beyond it, and then at Sayla. "Because you called," she said, "and no one else came." She said it the same way Voss had said it, the same way Chen had, the same flat, simple delivery that was not performance and not philosophy, just a fact, the most basic fact, the thing from which everything else followed. Sayla was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, "I did not think anyone would come." "I know," Okafor said. "I sent the signal to you because there was no one else to send it to. I did not expect it to work." "I know that too." Sayla looked at her hands. "That doesn't make you angry, that we called you as a last resort?" Okafor thought about this honestly. "You called," she said finally. "The order you called doesn't matter." Sayla looked at her for a long time. "What do you want from us?" she said. "From Verath. In return." Okafor started to say nothing, and stopped, because that was both true and not precise enough. "We want the next species that needs help to send the signal to us, and know we'll come," she said. "That's what we want, that the signal works, that people know it works." She paused. "That's enough." Sayla was quiet all the way back to the airlock. At the door she stopped and turned around. "Elder Verath says the Compact is drafting a new security framework," she said. "A rapid response protocol." "I've heard," Okafor said. "He wants us to co-sponsor it, with the humans." "I know. He says," Sayla stopped, started again. "He says that the Compact has 53 species, and most of them are afraid, and they need to see someone not afraid before they can believe not being afraid is possible." Okafor thought about that. "Tell him yes," she said. "Tell him we'll co-sponsor it." Sayla nodded, turned to go, stopped once more. "Captain." "Yes." "Your ship," she said. "Harbinger, what does that mean, in your language?" Okafor almost smiled. "A harbinger is a sign of something coming," she said. "Something that arrives first to announce what follows." Sayla looked at her. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly right." The Krath made their decision on day 44. Not through a declaration, not through a diplomatic channel, not through any of the formal mechanisms that species use when they want to communicate that something is going to happen. Through action. 7 Krath warships entered the Peloth system at 0400 Compact Standard Time. The Peloth were a small species, 11,000 people across 2 settlements, a mining operation, no military. They were not Compact members. They had no treaties with anyone. They were simply a people in a place, the kind of people the Krath found easiest. The blockade was fully established in 6 hours. The emergency signal reached human monitoring stations in 4. Admiral Sarah Osei was asleep when the alert came. Aboard Consequence, sleeping was something you did when you could and stopped when you had to, and 11 years of command had trained her body to the schedule with a kind of ruthless efficiency. She was awake and reading the alert in the same motion. She was on the bridge in 4 minutes. Her executive officer Adeyemi was already there. He had the tactical display up and the sensor data organized in the format she preferred, which meant he had been awake before the alert, or had been awake since, and had not called her until there was something worth calling about. "Talk," she said. 7 Krath warships, Peloth system, textbook blockade formation. They went in fast, tighter spacing than Verath, which means they expected potential response. The jamming is different too. He indicated the sensor data, tighter spectrum, blocking the specific frequency they know we monitor, but not blocking everything. Signal got out through a gap. May have been deliberate from the Peloth side. They're not Compact members, but they've got basic emergency kit. Someone knew what frequencies matter. Osei looked at the tactical display. 7 ships. The Peloth had nothing that could engage them. The system was 4 days from the nearest human fleet position. 4 days. "Dispatch," she said. "Already coded, waiting on your authorization." She authorized it. The message went to fleet. It also went, simultaneously, to the 2 other locations that Directive 7 specified. She already knew what Fleet was going to say. Fleet was going to say, "Peloth is not a Compact member, there is no Article 7 application, the humanitarian provision does not clearly cover non-member systems, we need legal review." Legal review. 4 days from now. She looked at Adeyemi. He looked at her. "Consequence can be in Peloth system in 31 hours, he said. "Not as a recommendation, as information." Independent action without fleet authorization, she said. Yes. In a system, the compact framework does not clearly cover. Yes. Against 7 Krath warships that position tighter than Verath, specifically because they're expecting us. Yes. He paused. They also probably noticed that consequence was in the region. She thought about that. The Krath had positioned this carefully. 7 ships, tighter formation, modified jamming. They had looked at Verath and made adjustments. They had picked a non-compact member, no Article 7 application. They had modified the jamming to block human frequencies. They had done everything they could think of to make this different from Verath. They were testing something. They wanted to know if the humans would come when the framework did not clearly apply, when there was no treaty provision, when the target was a species nobody had heard of in a system nobody needed, when the math said, this is someone else's problem. They wanted to know if Verath had been a special case, if there were conditions on when the humans showed up, if there was a signal that did not get answered. Osei looked at the tactical display for a long time. 11,000 people, 2 settlements, a mining operation, no one who knew to call anyone specifically, a gap in a jamming field that someone had worked very hard to make. They had not called the humans. They probably did not know the humans existed as a distinct possibility. The signal was a general emergency broadcast, the oldest kind, sent in all directions, hoping. It had reached human monitoring. That was all. Osei thought about the things Sese had said, in a briefing 2 years ago, that had lodged somewhere. The species that shows up, that was what they had decided to be. Not because it was strategically optimal every single time, because it was what you were or you weren't, and being it half the time, when it was easy, was the same as not being it at all. General quarters, she said. Adeyemi's hand was already on the comm. Plot intercept course for Peloth, she said. Best speed. Aye. And get me Captain Chen. Chen was in Verath system still, on Harbinger, support operations. His face appeared on her screen 30 seconds later. He had the look of someone who had already read the situation report. Admiral, he said, you've seen the Peloth data. Yes. Consequence is 31 hours out. You're closer. 22 hours, he said. You would be first again. Yes. She looked at him. He was the same as he had been the first time. Steady, unremarkable, the kind of person you did not write songs about. He had gone first at Verath, with no authorization, no backup, no certainty of what was coming behind him. Chen, she said, you know what this is. The Krath picked this specifically. Non-member system. Modified jamming. 7 ships. They want to know if we'll come when it's inconvenient. I know, he said. Fleet is going to have strong opinions. I imagine so, if you go first again. Admiral, he said it simply. They need someone there. She looked at him. Even 1 ship, he said, changes what they know. She recognized the words. Okafor had said them, probably said them to Chen. The thing moved through the crew of a ship, the right idea, repeated, until it was part of the furniture. Go, she said. He went. Harbinger entered Peloth system at 0200 compact standard. The Krath formation was as reported, tighter than Verath. 7 ships instead of 9, a configuration built for faster response. They had clearly anticipated a single-ship probe. They had not been wrong. But they had been thinking about it as a probe. Chen had not come to probe. He broadcast on every available frequency, including the scrambled human bands that the Krath jamming had specifically blocked, which told the Krath that either the jamming had gaps or the humans had already developed workarounds, both of which were worth worrying about. He said, Krath Blockade Command, Uns Harbinger, Humanitarian Emergency Response, Peloth System. Please be aware that additional vessels are in transit. We are prepared to wait. He did not issue a 90-minute deadline. He did not say you have X time to withdraw. He said, we are prepared to wait. The Krath formation held. Chen waited. Below, in the Peloth settlements, someone with access to a basic monitoring station was watching the sensor feed. They could see the Krath ships they had been watching for 11 hours. They could see 1 new ship, smaller, different profile. They did not know what it was. They would find out later. They would find out when the blockade broke, and the human ships came down, and the strange people who asked questions before they did things, brought food and medicine, and a medical team who worked alongside whoever was available, and did not seem to need to be thanked, and left 3 weeks later, quietly, the way you leave when you were never there to make an entrance. But that was later. Right now there was one human ship between them and 7 Krath warships, and it was saying, "We are prepared to wait." Aboard the Krath command vessel, Sub-Admiral Verath had the human signal on loop. He had not been at Verath. He had reviewed the Verath records extensively. Everyone in the Krath fleet had reviewed the Verath records, because Vorak's after-action report was the most discussed document in Krath military channels in 20 years. He had read every line of it. He had read Vorak's assessment of the human cost structure. He had read the engagement records that Verath had requested from intelligence. He had been given this command specifically because his superiors believed he could do what Verath had not. They wanted to know if Harbinger alone was the limit of the test, if consequence would not come to a non-member system, if the human response had conditions. He had his answer to the first question. Harbinger had come. One ship, as before, first. The second question, he still did not know. He looked at his second-in-command, Officer Tessin. Time for additional human assets to reach this system? Tessin calculated. Minimum 22 hours. Likely more. Consequence is the only asset with the profile to significantly affect. 22 hours, Verath said. Sir. He looked at the tactical display. 1 human ship, 7 Krath warships. He had the advantage. He had prepared for exactly this. The modified jamming, the tighter formation, the positioning, it was all specifically calculated for this moment. He had the advantage. He sat with it for 11 hours. Then he requested an uplink to Dominion Command. The response took 40 minutes. He read it. He read it twice. The response was not what he had asked for. He had asked for authorization to engage the human vessel. He had given the tactical analysis. He had explained the advantage. He had outlined the operation. What he received back was a list of questions. How certain are you of the capability differential? What are the human crew numbers? What is the contingency if they have assets outside sensor range? What is the contingency if consequence arrives within 22 hours? What is the contingency if the engagement does not go as expected? Questions. Not authorization. Questions. Because the people at Dominion Command who had reviewed the same records Verath had reviewed had the same weight in their chest that Verath had described. The understanding that the human cost structure was different, that you could not calculate around an opponent who was not calculating the same way you were. What are the contingencies? Verath looked at the questions for a long time. Then he looked at his tactical display. 1 human ship, still waiting, still broadcasting, we are prepared to wait. He thought about what that meant, not the words, the decision to say them, the decision to come here and say them with 1 ship against 7, and not issue a deadline, and not appear frightened and simply wait, as if the outcome were not in question, as if it had already been decided and the 7 Krath warships simply had not been informed yet. He thought about Verath 7 asking Verath, "Are you telling us the humans are irrational?" He thought about Verath's answer. They are rational within a different system of values. He thought about what it would mean to engage Harbinger. Even winning, what would follow? The humans would come. Consensus across every briefing Verath had attended was, they would come. Consequence would come, and behind consequence would be everything it announced, the same way a Harbinger announced what followed. Win against Harbinger. Then what? He made his decision. Consequence was 11 hours out when Verath ordered withdrawal. 7 Krath warships leaving formation, moving toward the jump corridor. The same clean, purposeful movement as Verath. Not retreating, technically, just choosing to be somewhere else. Chen watched them go. He did not let the crew celebrate yet, not until the last ship was through the corridor, not until the sensor read was clean, and the jamming had dropped and the Peloth signal was coming through clear. Not the emergency broadcast anymore, just signal, the ordinary traffic of a people going about their day. Then he let them celebrate. Not for long. Harbinger was a working ship, and there was work. But for a moment, he sat in his command chair and he looked at the viewport and he thought about 40 years of humanity in space, and what those years had added up to. Not glory, not conquest, not any of the things the old stories said a species did when it got to the stars. They had added up to this, to being the thing you said you were, to showing up when it cost something, to sending the signal that meant we're coming, and then coming, every time, without conditions, without asterisks. It was not a complicated thing. It was the simplest thing. He opened a channel to Verath. The first voice from below was a young Verath man whose name, translated, came out as something like Vessel Keeper, a mining designation, not a personal name, because the Verath did not use personal names the way most species did. He said, "Human ship, you came." Chen said, "Yes." "We did not know you existed." "We've been around," Chen said. "The Verath, they left." "Yes." A pause. Why did they leave? Chen thought about how to answer this. There were several true answers. He went with the simplest one. "Because we were here," he said. Another pause. Longer. "Who are you?" the voice said. Not rhetorically, not as a political question, as the most basic question one person asks another when they do not have a category for them yet. "Who are you?" Chen looked at his crew. Quan at comms, running the translation. Martinez at the helm. Ensign Park at sensors, 18 years old, the youngest person on the ship, who had volunteered for this assignment, and had been awake for the whole 31 hours, all of them doing their jobs with the ordinary, unglamorous competence that kept people alive. "We're humans," Chen said. "We're from a planet called Earth. We've been out here for about 40 years. 40 years, the voice said. "That's not very long." "No," Chen said, "it's not. But you came." "Yes." The Verath man was quiet for a moment. Then, "Will you come again, if it happens again?" Chen did not hesitate. "Send the signal," he said. "We'll come." The Compact's new rapid response protocol passed 4 months after Verath, with 31 member species co-sponsoring. The Sorath were among them, 3 border disputes with the Krath, and a calculation that had finally shifted. Verath applied for Compact membership 6 weeks after the blockade ended. Their application was approved in record time. The Krath Dominion issued no formal statements about either development. In classified channels, Dominion Command opened a new file. The file had a designation, internal code, not intended for external communication. When Compact Intelligence Services intercepted it a year later, the translation came back with some uncertainty, but the core phrase held across all interpretive frameworks. "The humans unresolved." Elder Morath read that report in his communications room on Verath, with Selah next to him, 11 months after the blockade ended. The eastern ridge was green again. The fires were long gone. There were supply agreements and diplomatic frameworks and 3 joint projects, including one involving the restoration of the Verath Northern Communication Network, which humans were helping to rebuild because someone had asked and they had said yes. He read the Krath file designation. The humans unresolved. He thought about what it meant to be unresolved, to be the thing that did not fit the existing framework, to be the species that a 400-year empire could not file correctly because it kept doing the thing that species were not supposed to do when the math was against them. He thought about Okafor saying we'll come without conditions. He thought about Chen showing up alone in Verath and saying we are prepared to wait. He thought about Dr. Voss in a conference room saying we decided not to do it again as if it were an ordinary thing to say. As if collective moral decision-making were simply something species did sometimes when they looked at themselves carefully enough. He thought about Consequence sitting at the edge of sensor range, 9 kilometers long, not moving, not threatening, simply existing as a fact about the universe. The humans, unresolved. He was 300 years old. He had lived through conquests and treaties and the long bureaucratic machinery of species negotiating their survival with each other. He had seen the Krath take worlds. He had seen the compact vote and deliberate and draft frameworks, and mostly leave small species to the Krath's patience. He had sent a signal with no expectation. Something had come back. He sat in his chair and he thought, here is a species 40 years in space that does not know what it will become yet. Here is a species that has looked at itself and made some decisions about what it will and will not be. Here is a species that has a ship called Consequence and a ship called Harbinger, and sends one alone to announce what follows and then follows. Here is a species that is unresolved. He was glad of it. He looked at Selah. She was reading the same report. Her face had the expression that he had learned over 11 months was her version of feeling something she did not have the exact word for. "Unresolved," she said. "Yes, that's what they called us, 60 years ago," she said, "when we were new to the Compact. Unresolved potential, species with unclear trajectory. He had not known that. And what resolved it? She thought. Time and choices. And what we did when no one was watching. She paused. What we did when people needed us, and the math said it wasn't worth it. He nodded. They were both quiet for a while. Outside, Verath's sky was the right color. Blue, the particular blue it had always been, that they had not seen for 11 days during the blockade, and had missed in the specific, sharp way you miss something you had never thought to be grateful for until it was gone. It was blue now. Someone had come. Thunder had descended, quiet and complete, and had not fired a single shot, and the thing that had been circling for 11 days had gone away. Somewhere, a species called humans was 40 years into the stars, unresolved, carrying a system of values that older empires could not file correctly and could not predict, and had chosen not to test a second time. Somewhere, a ship called Consequence was at the edge of somebody else's sensor range, sitting the way it sat, waiting the way it waited. Not threatening, just there. Announcing what followed. Verath closed the report. He looked at the sky through the window of the communications room, where 11 months ago a young woman had knocked on his door at night and said, "Signal, Elder," and he had thought, "I do not expect anything." He thought about how much had changed. Not because the universe had changed. The Krath were still the Krath. Empires were still empires. The Compact was still the Compact. 53 species negotiating survival in a space that did not arrange itself for anyone's convenience. What had changed was one thing. There was a signal now, and people knew it worked.